They played, and everyone held their breath. A fallen high-voltage wire sparking on the wet street, ready to kill in seconds. Neighbors screamed, hearts raced, and then something impossible happened. In a fraction of a second, what should have been a tragedy turned into a moment no one would ever forget. Get ready. This story will challenge everything you believe about fate and divine protection. Dawn in Westford, a small town in the English countryside, seemed to herald a quiet weekend. The grey sky carried lazy clouds reflecting the timid sunlight, while a thin mist rose from the river. The narrow streets, with wet red bricks from the previous night's rain, exuded the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. Some windows remained closed, with lace curtains swaying gently in the cold breeze coming down from the hills. It seemed like any other day, but behind the calm, something invisible was about to transform that morning into an eternal memory. Ethan, 28, a mechanic known to everyone in the village, walked with steady steps beside his younger brother Liam, 15. The boy carried a bucket of old tools, while the older brother balanced a bundle of freshly cut firewood. The two laughed about something trivial, the kind of conversation only siblings share when they believe they're far from any danger. The gravel and mud path they followed, past silent gardens and old wooden sheds, creaking under the wind. What they didn't know was that the previous night's storm had left. More than puddles and branches in its wake, it had turned the landscape into a silent trap. Every detail of the scene reinforced the sense of an ordinary day: birds building nests, the distant smell of smoke from lit fireplaces, the soft sound of a dog barking behind a fence. But there was something almost imperceptible in the air, a faint electrical hum in the distance, blending with the wind. Between conversations, Liam kicked a stone into a puddle, laughing as the splash wet the hem of his pants. An innocent move, but one that brought him dangerously close to a spot where nature and electricity had collided in a lethal way. Westford was the kind of town where nothing seemed urgent, where days followed their own slow, predictable rhythm. Perhaps that's why it was so easy to ignore subtle signs of danger. A fallen high-voltage wire doesn't announce itself with a bang. It waits in silence. When rain and wind knock down poles or rip cables, a wet street becomes an invisible threat. Few people know that a simple puddle can conduct enough energy to stop a heart instantly. At that moment, the brothers walked distractedly, carrying firewood and tools, unaware that the very ground ahead of them hid a deadly risk. As they continued down the alley, Ethan noticed strange marks in the mud, small scorched streaks, as if something had scratched the ground in a straight line. He almost mentioned it to Liam, but was distracted by the sound of the river in the background. Curiously, studies show that most electrical accidents happen in calm settings because people lower their guard when they believe nothing can happen. That's exactly what made that morning so dangerous: the calm before the impact. Liam, ever curious, pointed to the sky, where wires swayed between poles, some visibly bent. "Will someone fix that today?" he asked casually, as if it were just another detail in the landscape. Ethan shrugged, laughing. "Oh, things take forever around here. Those wires stay like that for days. But don't touch them, you never know." They kept walking, ignoring the subtle shiver that ran down Ethan's spine when a gust of wind made the cables creak. Little did they know that the next corner held the first step toward the unexpected. The wind carried the metallic scent of ozone, that storm-like aroma many don't even notice. Liam took a deep breath, feeling the mix of cold air and youthful excitement from being outdoors. Across the river, an elderly woman swept her porch, waving at them with a calm smile. Nothing in the scene suggested danger, and perhaps that was the greatest trap of all. With each step, the scenery changed subtly. Lower trees, leaves scorched by electric wind, and a strange quiet, as if even the birds had sensed it was time to stay away. Ethan felt that twinge of unease again, but like most adults accustomed to predictable routines, he ignored it. Everyday life has that power. It makes us believe we're safe until fate proves otherwise. It was in this exact climate of false security that the first sign appeared, a bluish glow reflecting in the mud, almost invisible to the untrained eye. For now, it was just another subtle detail, lost among broken branches and the damp morning scent. If someone had stopped to look closely, they might have realized that this bucolic scene was about to become the setting for an unforgettable testimony. The word of the Lord reminds us, "The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him and delivers for them." Here are other angels among us, You'll see real stories proving that he still sends his angels. Subscribe and turn on notifications to witness miracles of deliverance. The silence in Westford that morning felt different. The wet streets reflected the grey sky like broken mirrors, while leaves stuck to the asphalt trembled in the cold breeze. Ethan and Liam were walking back from the shed, carrying the tool bag and some pieces of wood. The smell of damp earth and rust filled the air, giving the sense that the town was still breathing the remnants of the previous night's storm. Nothing suggested that, just a few meters away, routine was about to shatter. A sudden glint caught Liam's peripheral vision. On the ground, a thick, twisted cable snaked between two puddles, emitting small bluish sparks. Each crackle lit up the mist like miniature lightning bolts, and the air filled with the smell of ozone, that electric scent that makes the heart race for no apparent reason. Ethan stopped instantly. What seemed like a simple cable was now a fallen high-voltage wire, silent, lethal, and treacherous. That's when the unexpected happened. A wrench slipped from Liam's open bag, hit the wet asphalt, and began sliding slowly, as if time itself had slowed down. Each small bounce on the wet pavement sounded louder than the wind itself. It stopped inches from the live wire, almost touching the sparking puddle. Ethan's heart raced. That wasn't just a tool, it was a sentence, waiting for a misstep. A shout echoed from across the street, tearing through the silence like an unexpected thunderclap. "Careful! That'll kill you!" The old neighbor, leaning out his window, had a face gripped by panic. The warning seemed to travel slowly, cutting through the cold air to reach the brothers' ears. The sound of the words mixed with the electric crackle, creating a symphony of alarm no one wanted to hear. Liam's gaze fixed on the wet wrench. The world around him seemed to vanish, leaving only the gleaming metal, the sparking puddle, and the realization that any wrong move could change everything forever. The wind blew harder, swaying the wires on the poles above them, as if the entire town held its breath at the scene. Deep down, an almost imperceptible feeling began to form, a mix of fear and something no one could explain, as if invisible eyes were watching. Liam's youthful instinct made his body take a hesitant step forward, but his mind screamed that this was a line he shouldn't cross. The dilemma was set, and every second that followed carried the weight of the inevitable. The moment the body acts before the mind comprehends is impossible to predict. A metallic sound echoed on the wet asphalt, followed by the wrench sliding toward the sparking wire. Liam's heart pounded and the world seemed to narrow. There was no reasoning, only instinct. The same kind of impulse that makes someone jump into a river to save a child without knowing how to swim or react to. A robbery despite knowing the risk. In a fraction of a second, his body crouched on its own. His young hand, still dirty with mud, reached for the wet metal. A sharp crack cut through the air, followed by the unmistakable hum of electricity coursing through flesh and bone. Tiny blue sparks danced in the cold air, briefly illuminating Ethan's terrified face. Liam's body trembled convulsively for a fraction of a second and then fell back into the mud, lifeless, as if life had been switched off by an invisible force. The sound of light rain returning blended with the heavy silence that enveloped the street. Ethan froze for a second, feeling the world around him disappear. The sight of his brother lying still, with half-closed eyes and an unmoving chest, pierced through any fear that could exist. There was no room to think about danger, only love. His mind screamed that touching the body could mean another deadly shock, but his heart had already decided otherwise. The scream that tore from his throat ripped through the damp air. "Liam!" Soaked shoes slapped the asphalt as Ethan ran, slipping in the mix of water and mud. His body instinctively tried to recall some safety protocol. Don't touch directly, don't turn carelessly, but the love for the boy who'd grown up by his side spoke louder. Each step felt like a race against death itself. Windows opened in a silent chorus of horror. An elderly neighbor dropped a teacup upon seeing the boy sprawled out, and two women began running down the street, shouting for help. The wind swayed broken branches, and the wires still hummed like electric serpents, making the scene even more cinematic. Every gaze carried the same question: was it already too late? Ethan knelt in the mud beside the motionless body. His hands trembled, but his chest burned with a courage born only of love. The touch was seconds away. The instinct for self-preservation, always shouting, "Be careful," had been silenced by a deeper feeling. Every muscle in his body was about to defy the risk that could take two lives instead of one. The tension in the street reached its peak. and no one could look away. Every second of this scene shows how life can change in the blink of an eye. If this part touched you, comment, "I felt it here," and let's see who else was left breathless watching. For a moment that felt like an eternity. The street remained in absolute silence, broken only by the distant call of a crow and the cold wind passing through the wet trees. The leaves trapped in puddles spun slowly, as if the world had decided to wait for the outcome of that moment. Ethan, kneeling in the mud, kept his eyes fixed on his brother's face, his chest tight with a mix of fear and hope. Then, an almost imperceptible breath escaped Liam's parted lips, a fragile sound but full of life. The young body trembled slightly, and his eyes opened with difficulty, blinking against the grey light of the cloudy sky. The air trapped in the lungs of everyone around finally escaped in a collective sigh. Against all logic, he was alive. His small hands showed only faint red marks, reminders of the danger that had nearly taken him. No smell of burning, no charred skin, just discrete signs that defied any rational explanation. A human life had passed through a line of thousands of volts and returned almost unscathed. It was the kind of scene that, in movies, would seem exaggerated, but here, it was too real to doubt. Mrs. Collins, the elderly neighbor who knew, every story on those streets approached with slow steps. Her trembling arms crossed over her chest, and her teary eyes reflected a mix of fear and reverence. This is impossible. He should be dead," she murmured, almost voiceless. At that moment, a cold breeze swept through the street, different from any normal gust. It wasn't strong, but it carried something silent, almost sacred. The trees stopped swaying for a second, and even the sound of fallen branches seemed distant. Everyone there felt a strange calm, a deep comfort that didn't come from the physical world. It was as if someone invisible had passed by, looking at everyone, ensuring that boy still had a purpose. Ethan, still with his knees sunk in the mud, let tears fall without shame. Each drop that fell mixed with the dirty water on the ground, but inside his chest, something shone. His heart pulsed with pure gratitude. His hands clasped instinctively, and his choked voice murmured, "Thank you. Oh God, thank you." The Gimam scene seemed straight out of one of those stories old fishermen tell about improbable deliverances. But now, every neighbor watching felt deep down that something greater was at play, something human eyes couldn't see. Perhaps it was angels. Perhaps it was the hand of God fulfilling the promise of Psalm 34:7, "The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him and delivers them." And in that small stretch of soaked street, in a town where nothing usually happened, everyone knew they had witnessed a silent miracle, the kind of moment that makes anyone stop and rethink whether they're truly alone in the world. And as the ambulance was called and makeshift first aid began, no one could shake the memory of that breeze, that calm, that impossible breath. Something greater had touched that day. Do you believe angels still walk among us? Right, I believe, and let's see how many hearts still recognize God's miracles. The miracle on the asphalt and the silence of the hospital. The car sped through the wet streets, cutting through the thin mist still covering the sleepy town. The smell of damp earth mixed with gasoline, and every jolt of the vehicle made Ethan's heart nearly leap out of his chest. His arms wrapped around his still fragile brother, and the world seemed to spin slowly as the driver, wide-eyed, gripped the steering wheel and muttered prayers that barely left his mouth. Every second on that ride felt eternal, and the passing poles gave the sensation that life had turned into a slow-motion film. In the back seat, a miracle began to reveal itself in fragile words. Liam, with a hoarse voice, moved his lips and whispered, "I felt like someone was holding me." The world stopped for an instant inside that car. Ethan swallowed hard and couldn't respond, only tightened his embrace, feeling his chest warm with a mix of fear and hope. Those few words carried more than relief. They bore the weight of something no one there could explain with logic. It was the feeling of escaping an accident that seemed inevitable, or sensing, "I wasn't supposed to survive that." Experiences like these mark forever, and often only those who go through them understand. Upon arriving at the hospital, the cold corridors swallowed them. The smell of alcohol and disinfectant filled the air, and the echo of footsteps seemed to match the tension in everyone's chests. Doctors and nurses rushed to tend to the boy, laying him on a clean stretcher, connecting monitors, and checking vital signs. The environment, lit by harsh white lights, gave the impression that every detail was under divine observation. The first exam left the doctor silent. Liam's skin showed only faint red marks, almost like scratches. No third-degree burns, no muscle damage. His heart beat steadily. His breathing was stable and his reflexes responded normally. The doctor, accustomed to electrical traumas, scratched his head and stammered, This doesn't make sense. Scientifically, it doesn't make sense that he's alive." The phrase echoed in the ears of everyone nearby. Any other patient in direct contact with that current would have suffered severe burns, cardiac arrest, or even instant death. It was statistics. It was science. But there, before everyone's eyes, something beyond reason had happened. Ethan leaned against the corridor wall, feeling his legs weaken. A reel of quick memories flashed through his mind. Liam's laughter in the workshop, races in the backyard, the younger brother knocking on his door whenever he was scared of thunder. The thought of almost losing all that tightened his chest and at the same time ignited a flame of gratitude hard to describe. Outside, the wind that once carried rain now gently swayed the trees. It was as if nature itself confirmed that something invisible and powerful had passed through that day. And in the hospital's silence, interrupted only by the beeping of monitors, a certainty took shape. There is something, or someone, watching over those who still have a story to live. In the cold hospital corridor, Ethan still smelled the disinfectant mixed with the metallic scent of fear. Liam slept, breathing slowly, while monitors blinked with that steady rhythm that both comforts and unsettles. The doctor had repeated 3 times, "It doesn't make sense that he's alive." That phrase echoed in his mind like a distant bell, impossible to ignore. At that moment, an attendant entered, informing him that the electrical company inspector wanted to speak with him. His heart raced. There was an almost childish fear of returning to the place where it all happened, but also a need to understand what had saved his brother. The employee explained calmly, he needs someone from the family to accompany him to the accident site, to check details and file the official report. A knot tightened in his throat. Ethan looked at the stretcher, lightly touched the sheet near Liam's shoulder, and whispered, "I'll be right back, stay strong." Leaving the hospital for the wet street felt like stepping into another world. The light rain had stopped, but the sky still carried that grey tone that precedes dusk. The electrical company's car waited with its engine running. Inside, the inspector, a middle-aged man with soaked boots and a heavy expression, gave a quick wave. "Let's go. The sooner we file this, the better. I want to understand up close how this all happened." The drive to the accident site was silent, except for the rhythmic sound of the windshield wiper. Each turn made his stomach churn, as if he were traveling back in time to the sound of the electrical snap and Liam's body falling into the mud. For a moment, fear brought images too vivid. What if it had been worse? What if that was his last memory of his brother? When they got out of the car, the wind carried the smell of wet earth and burnt metal. Ethan realized that returning there was unlike anything else. The place seemed narrower, darker, as if it held the memory of danger. The high-voltage wire was still sparking, spitting small blue flashes. The inspector walked carefully, making technical comments, but all attention was on the ground where Liam had fallen. "Look here," the inspector said, kneeling in the mud. "Any direct contact with that wire should have been fatal. It's not an opinion. It's pure physics." Ethan stared at the exact spot where his brother had collapsed. The mud still bore the imprint of his body, and small puddles reflected the grey sky. A shiver ran down his spine. At that moment, something metallic caught his eye. Amid the mud and wet leaves, a faint glint shone. He knelt slowly, ignoring the dirt, and brushed the mud away with trembling fingers. There was the small metal cross Liam always wore around his neck, now covered in mud but insisting on shining. His heart raced. Holding that object brought a wave of memories. The days their mother said faith showed itself in the details, the mornings when Liam would touch the cross as if seeking courage to face school, and the rare moments of prayer before dinner when they all believed they were protected in some invisible way. The inspector broke the silence with an almost reverent tone. "You know, I've seen accidents like this end differently. That kid, I can't explain it, but he got a second chance no one can understand." Ethan closed his hand around the cross, feeling the cold, heavy metal, as if it carried a story bigger than everyone there. The wind blew, swaying branches and lifting soaked leaves, and for a moment the world seemed suspended. No traffic, no voices, just that charged silence that precedes something transformative. In that moment, he understood that their lives had crossed an invisible threshold. It wasn't just about the accident or luck anymore, it was about signs, silent but impossible to ignore. And when the inspector turned off the equipment and announced he'd record it in the report as survival, with no logical explanation, Ethan knew the true explanation wouldn't fit on any paper. Stories like this prove that sometimes the heavens bend to save a life. If you believe in second chances too, leave a heart in the comments. After retrieving the small cross from the mud and feeling the symbolic weight of that cold object in his palm, Ethan returned to the hospital with slow steps. The electrical company's car dropped him off at the emergency entrance, and as he crossed the lobby lit by white lights, a mix of relief and disbelief filled every breath. Keeping that secret in silence seemed impossible. The story was already starting to spread. As he walked through the corridors, a nurse whispered to another, "It's that boy from the electric shock. Survived without serious burns." A sense of curiosity and reverence permeated the hospital, as if everyone there was aware they were witnessing something rare. Hours later, the first local journalists appeared outside the building. In a small town, news like this spreads faster than any car. Mrs. Collins's name came up naturally in conversations. The elderly neighbor, known for never missing a thing on the street, claimed she had seen something inexplicable. She was the first to give an interview to the community radio, her voice trembling and eyes teary. It wasn't the wire's light, it was different, like an aura around the boy. A light that didn't burn your eyes, it just warmed your heart, she said, clutching her floral handkerchief to her chest. Her words quickly spread through sidewalks, bakeries, and churches. Other neighbors confirmed feeling something strange in the air at the moment of the accident. A housewife recounted dropping a pot of rice when a shiver ran down her spine, followed by sudden calm. A teenager said in a friend's livestream that the wind stopped for a few seconds before hearing Ethan's cry for help. These accounts seemed to weave an invisible narrative. Something greater than any technical explanation had touched that street that afternoon. The radio interviews became a mix of testimonies and heated debates. Some townsfolk believed in luck, insisting that strange accidents happen. A physics teacher commented live that voltage drops and irregular electrical discharges could, in very rare cases, allow survival. But even he sounded unconvincing, hesitating in his own explanation. On the other side, emotional voices spoke of a miracle. A local pastor shared that, at the exact moment of the accident, he felt a sudden urge to pray for a young person in danger, without even knowing who it was. That detail spread through the town like a spark in dry straw. In cafes and grocery stores, it was the only topic. Old friends pulled up chairs to discuss the story, and entire families around the dinner table wondered if something divine could have happened there. Kids at school repeated that Liam had been embraced by angels, and even the skeptics, though laughing, fell silent for a few seconds before changing the subject. The case was no longer just an accident. It became a point of communal reflection, a silent reminder that the line between life and death can be thinner than anyone imagines. The town seemed to breathe differently that night. Some neighbors placed candles in their windows. Others sent anonymous messages to the family with prayers written on simple notes. Ethan, watching Liam sleep in his hospital bed, felt like the whole world was watching them now, and that small mud-stained metal cross had sparked something impossible to contain. Deep in his heart, he felt that this was just the first chapter of a story no one would forget. The days following the hospitalization turned the hospital into a stage for unanswered questions. Reports and test results circulated through silent rooms and corridors. Clean CT scans showing no internal burns revealed intact organs, and electrocardiograms displayed heartbeats as steady as an athlete's. Not a single arrhythmia, not a trace of hidden injury. Technicians and nurses exchanged discreet glances, aware they were facing something that defied the manuals they'd studied for years. It was as if every page of the medical record screamed, "This doesn't make sense." And yet Liam was breathing, smiling, and asking for hot chocolate. The contrast between science and mystery hung in the air like a cloud, and everyone who entered that room left with a story to tell. The chief doctor, known for his skepticism, entered the room on the third morning with the test results in hand. He opened the envelope slowly, as if searching for a hidden flaw in the evidence, and faced the family with a look of surrender. "There's no plausible explanation. He touched high voltage and is here, smiling. This shouldn't be possible." The words fell on the room like a cold breath. For Ethan, it wasn't news. Since the moment he found the metal cross in the mud, he felt the answers wouldn't fit in, charts or medical reports, but hearing it from an expert made his heart race, as if someone had signed off on what was already etched in his soul. Meanwhile, outside the hospital's white walls, the story took on a life of its own. A regional newspaper printed in bold letters, "Boy survives deadly shock in Westford. Miracle or coincidence?" The headline spread to neighboring towns and found space on phone and computer screens. Opinions split between skeptics and believers. Comments in forums and local groups popped up, raising theories. Some mentioned natural insulators in the ground, others cited rare muscular reflexes that prevent full shock. But with every attempt at a logical explanation, someone pointed out the detail that broke any theory: how to explain the faint marks on his hands and the absence of deep burns from direct contact with high voltage. The buzz sparked debates in schools, churches, markets, and even the post office line. Science teachers asked students how they'd interpret the case if it appeared on a test. In conversations, old stories of hidden miracles resurfaced, as if this survival had opened a forgotten drawer in the town's collective memory. Some residents recalled relatives who escaped fatal accidents with explanations too fragile to calm the heart. The difference was that this time everyone saw it, and there was no way to simply turn the page. For Ethan and Liam, none of it needed a newspaper's stamp or a radio debate. The answer was already within them, pulsing like the life that defied death. Every glance exchanged between the brothers seemed to say silently, "Someone was there with us." Deep down, that certainty was worth more than any report, headline, or attempt to reduce the impossible to numbers and statistics. It was a conviction that burned without hurting, as invisible as the light Mrs. Collins said she saw on that wet street. And the world outside didn't yet know, but this was just the beginning of a story that would never be forgotten. Between miracle and coincidence, what's your answer? Write miracle or coincidence, and let's see which side your heart's on. Returning home after the hospital discharge felt like entering another world. The same living room where the TV once blared now welcomed sunlight unhurriedly, and every corner carried a new sense of value. The breakfast table, once cluttered with phones and haste, now hosted long conversations and genuine laughter. Ethan, who for years had buried himself in extra work and excuses to delay dreams, realized no contract or career goal was worth more than the time he could spend with his brother. Evening walks, impromptu street basketball games, and even cooking together became small rituals that seemed to reclaim pieces of a childhood fear had nearly stolen. With every moment, a sense of second chance pulsed, as if the house had learned to breathe again. Liam, in turn, found a silent mission in his own story. The boy who almost didn't come back gained a new spark in his eyes, catching the attention of everyone he met. It started with simple acts, helping old Mr. Peterson carry groceries home or mowing Mrs. May's lawn without being asked. Gradually, he began visiting local shelters and nursing homes, sharing with the still sweet voice of youth the story of someone who faced death and returned with a smile. Many elderly listeners cried, feeling that life, however fragile, could still surprise. Volunteers whispered among themselves that the boy seemed to carry a kind of light, and that perception only grew with each new act of kindness. The family routine underwent a quiet rebirth. Without grand plans or expensive trips, their days were filled with presence. The local church, once just a building on the main street, became a second home. At first, the family sat discreetly in the back pews, almost shy under the curious gazes of those who knew their story from the papers. But over time, they joined studies, meetings, and prayer groups. What felt like an obligation to many became gratitude in motion for them. The sound of the choir, the scent of old wood, and even the creak of the pews created memories the accident could never erase. The sense that this life had been returned for a greater purpose began to guide every decision from then on. In a symbolic gesture that became almost a family ritual, they decided to place a small glass case on a living room shelf. Inside it rested two objects, laden with meaning only. They understood: the wrench Liam held during the shock and the small metal cross, still stained with dried mud. They weren't just keepsakes. They were silent witnesses to a day when death circled and was defeated. Sometimes visitors asked why those objects were there, and the response came in smiles or long pauses, as if some stories don't need telling to be felt. With every glance at that case, the family's heart filled with certainty. Living had become their greatest treasure, and every Second, from then on, would be honored as a gift, nearly taken away. The late afternoon sun painted the sky with shades of orange and gold, reflecting on the small town's rooftops, as if everything were part of a movie scene. The light breeze made dry leaves dance across the asphalt, and the distant sound of children playing mixed with the rhythmic pedaling of Liam's bicycle. The boy, now healthy and his skin glowing in the warm evening light, laughed carefree, as if the day of the accident were just a distant shadow. Beside him, Ethan walked slowly, attentive to every gesture of his brother, as if trying to memorize the present, to never miss a detail again. A simple moment, but filled with something only transformed hearts can feel: peace. When they reached the stretch of street where it all happened, silence enveloped them. The ground, once covered in mud and dangerous wires, was now firm, safe, and well marked. The poles had new insulators, and the electric company had left a discreet sign noting the grid had been repaired. Nothing there betrayed the tragedy that nearly changed everything, except for those who carried that memory etched in their hearts. Ethan stopped, took a deep breath, and let his gaze sweep over every detail of the scene that months before had been a stage of fear and tears. A memory flashed through his mind: the cross fallen in the mud, the chill down his spine realizing life hung by an invisible thread. The air felt heavier, and at the same time sacred, and it was in that moment that the words slipped out, almost a whisper but full of meaning. Every time I look at this place, I remember we're never really alone. The simple, sincere words seemed to dissolve any lingering fear. Liam looked at his brother and smiled. No need to respond. There was a silent understanding between them, a connection beyond any scientific or logical explanation. Perhaps it was gratitude. Perhaps it was the sense that something greater had been walking beside them since that day. If an imaginary camera existed, it would capture the moment in a slow pullback. First, it would show the two side by side, one walking, the other pushing the bicycle, with calm gestures of someone who's learned to live slowly. Then it would widen to reveal the entire street, bathed in sunset light, framing the reunion of life with simplicity. The silence, broken only by the sound of the wind and birds returning to their nests, would give viewers the sense that the world paused for a moment to celebrate that invisible victory. As they walked away, each step felt like a silent affirmation that life had won. The memory of sirens, chaos, and desperate voices had faded, replaced by a soundtrack of soft laughter and talks about simple plans for the next day. And it's in scenes like this that the audience realizes emotional endings don't need fireworks or crowds, just the certainty that what seemed lost was returned, and that gratitude can turn even ordinary asphalt into a sacred altar of memory. When everything seemed lost, something greater acted, and no one who witnessed it will forget that. Life won. Some stories aren't about luck, they're about care. Liam survived where no one would believe, reminding us that every heartbeat is a gift. Shall we pray together? Lord, thank you for the life we have, and for the deliverances we often don't even notice. Bless our families and protect every step of those we love. May we cherish each day more and recognize that we never walk alone. Amen. Some stories aren't about the fear of death, but about the beauty of continuing to live. Liam didn't return to defy the impossible. He returned to remind us that life is fragile, precious, and full of purpose. Because when invisible care reaches us, even silence fills with gratitude. New stories are coming, full of emotion and hope. Click the video below and live this next experience with us. Until then.